Welcome to Haunting Whispers, where the eerie and unknown come to life through spine-chilling stories. Our channel dives into the depths of horror, blending suspenseful narratives with vivid storytelling that will keep you on edge. From ghostly apparitions to haunted roads, each tale is crafted to stir your imagination and send shivers down your spine. Whether you're a fan of the supernatural, urban legends, or psychological thrillers, there's something here to captivate every horror enthusiast. Subscribe now and join us in exploring the shadows, where fear meets fiction. Don't miss Figures 1 through 5, releasing this Friday, when both streaming and HBO will intercept. Let us start the story of Reflections of the Abyss, the haunting legacy of the Cursed Lake. The sun had finally dipped completely below the horizon, casting the world in an eerie twilight. Despite the unsettling atmosphere that had settled over them, the group was determined to shake off their growing fears. They had come here to escape the chaos of their daily lives, to reconnect with nature, and to enjoy each other's company. So, when the suggestion of a swim was made, no one hesitated for long. The lake, still and dark under the fading light, seemed to invite them in. They all waded into the cool water, the surface smooth as glass. Anna, though still uneasy, tried to push her concerns aside. Rachel, ever the adventurous one, was the first to dive into the deeper waters, laughing as she splashed around. David and Mark followed suit, though they seemed more hesitant, perhaps subconsciously aware that something wasn't quite right. The rest of the others studied them closely, trying to think of something else to play with. Rachel, already several feet out into the lake, turned to wave at the others. Her movements were carefree, yet there was something in her expression, something that made Anna's stomach twist. It was as if Rachel was pushing through an invisible resistance, a subtle force pulling at her. Anna watched as Rachel swam deeper, her strokes becoming slower, more erratic, as though something was holding her back. Wait. Rachel, you okay? Mark called out, his voice cutting through the quiet of the night. At first, Rachel didn't respond. Then, her head jerked up, her eyes wide with panic. "Something's grabbing me!" she screamed, her voice filled with terror. Her arms flailed wildly, trying to push away whatever unseen force was pulling at her. But the others were too far away, and the dark water seemed to swallow her sound. "Somber! Somber! Rachel!" Anna shouted, her heart pounding in her chest, but no one else had heard her. Mark and David were still too far out to reach her in time. The distant shores seemed unreachable, the lake swallowing their cries, rendering them useless. As Rachel struggled in the water, her reflection in the surface of the lake began to shift. The image that stared back at her was not the Rachel she knew. Her reflection twisted and warped, becoming a version of herself she didn't recognize. Her face pale and distorted, her eyes hollow and dark. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Was this what she was becoming? Was this what was dragging her down into the depths? "Oh God, why haven't I gotten back up? I can't move." The water around her churned, growing violent. Rachel felt an icy grip close around her ankle, tugging her deeper. Panic surged through her, her heart racing as she gasped for breath. She screamed again, but this time her voice was muffled, swallowed by the depths. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the lake went still. The water was eerily calm as Rachel vanished beneath the surface, disappearing into the blackness below. The group on the shore stood frozen, helpless. Their eyes were wide with fear and confusion, unsure of what to do next. They rushed into the water, diving beneath the surface in search of Rachel, but she was nowhere to be found. Minutes passed like hours, but it felt as if the lake itself had swallowed her whole. No sign of Rachel remained, no ripple on the water's surface, no trace of her frantic struggle. Just as the others were about to give up hope, the water broke open with a splash and Rachel reappeared. But something was wrong. She stumbled out of the lake, her eyes wild and unfocused. She looked disoriented, her hair plastered to her face, water dripping from her clothes. The others rushed to her side, but when they looked at her, they saw someone different. There was a fear in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something deeper. Something beyond the terror of nearly drowning. Rachel, Anna whispered, her voice trembling. What happened? Rachel's gaze darted around the group, her expression one of confusion. Her lips parted, but it took a moment for her to speak. I don't know, she stammered, her voice distant. It was like something was pulling me into the depths, and then I don't know where I am. The others exchanged worried glances. Rachel's clothes were wet, but there was something about her, something that wasn't quite right. She was standing on the shore, but the world around her seemed different. The trees that had surrounded the lake before now looked twisted and old, their trunks gnarled and covered in moss. The air smelled thick, musty, as if it had been untouched for years. The moon that hung above them was no longer the familiar pale orb that had illuminated their night. It was now a darker, more ominous crescent, casting long shadows across the land. The world felt colder, more alien, as if they had crossed into a place that wasn't their own. I don't understand, Rachel whispered, taking a step back, her eyes wide with disbelief. Where are we? This isn't the same place. The group turned to look around, and that's when they saw it. The reflection in the lake. The water, usually a mirror to the world above, was now showing something different. It was as if the lake was revealing a version of the world they didn't recognize. The trees were decayed, their bark crumbling away. The surrounding area was empty, abandoned, old, forgotten ruins where the lush forest once stood. The reflection. Right, reflection stopped, making a stop right in the middle of the Pentagon Lake, the water flowing away to the distance. The lake itself appeared desolate, the water black as oil, devoid of the peaceful life it had once held. Anna felt her blood run cold. The lake, the trees, the land, everything had changed. But what was most unsettling was that it all looked like it had been forgotten, left to rot in some distant past or forgotten future. The reflection in the water showed a version of the world that was decayed, as if it had been abandoned for decades, maybe centuries. Rachel? David's voice faltered. Where did you go? Rachel's face was pale, and her body trembled as if she was still caught in some kind of nightmare. She took a step toward the others, but it was clear something had shifted within her. She wasn't the same person who had jumped into the water. The world around them was changing, and with it, so was the group. The air was heavy with an unspoken truth. This place was cursed, and they had just slipped into another version of reality, one where the lake held dark secrets they were not meant to uncover. Her cult was different than anything she'd ever known before. Not only had she never been here, she'd been there with her parents. Or was that what she thought she had? Time itself had bent, and the reflections in the water no longer matched the reality they had known. But the group stood in stunned silence as Rachel tried to make sense of her experience. Her voice trembled as she recounted what had happened beneath the surface. But no one could truly understand what she had gone through. The fear in her eyes was palpable, and the words she spoke seemed to make less and less sense with each passing moment. Anna watched her friend, unable to shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. Not just with Rachel, but with the very fabric of reality around them. As Rachel spoke, Anna's eyes shifted to the lake. The still, dark water called to her in a way she couldn't explain. There was something in the air, something thick and oppressive, that tugged at her insides. She could feel the pull of the water, like an invisible hand reaching for her. Her feet felt heavier with every step she took away from the shore, and though she was terrified to approach the water, a part of her felt drawn to it, and so she proposed medicine to Paul. Paul said yes. Paul said it lowered the weight his feet. The air around her buzzed with an eerie energy. and she fought the urge to step closer, to feel the water's chilling embrace, to understand what was happening. "Anna, stay away from it." David's voice broke through her thoughts, his words sharp with concern. Anna's body jerked, and she snapped her gaze back to the others, who were all staring at her with wide eyes. She hadn't realized she had moved so close to the water's edge. The pull had been so strong, almost magnetic. But now, as she took a step back, she could feel the tug weaken. The world around them had grown unsettlingly quiet, save for the rustling of the trees and the occasional whisper in the wind. Anna's body jerked, and she squinted as the wind receded, her eyes daring to pause on the dirt incline at the camp. Anna felt her heart pound in her chest. "We need to figure out what's going on," Rachel said, her voice filled with dread. "It's like the lake is changing us. I don't know how, but something's wrong. Something's pulling us into it." Mark shook his head, clearly trying to maintain his skepticism. "You're all being paranoid," he said dismissively, though his voice held a trace of uncertainty. "There's no such thing as alternate realities, time slipping, or anything supernatural. We're just tired and freaked out from the weirdness of it all." But Mark's bravado didn't last long. As the group lingered near the water's edge, the strange atmosphere grew thicker. The whispers Anna had heard in the trees seemed to grow louder, more distinct. They weren't just the wind anymore. They were voices. Faint and unintelligible at first, but gradually they became clearer, each syllable carrying a haunting tone, as if the very air was speaking to them, warning them. Anna turned to the others, her voice barely above a whisper. David and Rachel exchanged a glance, their faces pale with fear. Mark, too, was now visibly uncomfortable, his posture stiffening as the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the whispers of the trees anymore. The very air seemed to hum with something ancient. As they strained to listen, the whispers took on a new rhythm. Drown, drown, drown. The words were repeated over and over again, as though the lake itself was beckoning them into its depths. Mark's eyes widened, and for the first time since they had arrived, he seemed to be questioning everything. "What the hell is going on here?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Rachel stepped back from the water, her fear clearly rising once again. "I told you, something is wrong with this place. I'm telling you, the lake is alive. It's pulling us in. It wants something from us." Stephen took my hands in his. Rachel glared at me. "I'm telling you, do not go there alone." "I don't know if I can take any more of this," David said, his voice hoarse. "We need to leave. We need to go back to the car and drive out of here. This is insane." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them shifted. The trees, once familiar and rooted firmly in place, seemed to sway unnaturally, their gnarled branches reaching toward them like twisted hands. The air grew colder, the scent of decay heavy in the breeze. And then, without warning, the world around them shifted. It wasn't just the lake anymore. The entire landscape was changing. The once vibrant forest seemed to warp and bend, the foliage wilting and turning brown, as though it had been abandoned for centuries. The sound of the wind became harsh, like a shrieking gale, though no storm appeared on the horizon. The group stood frozen as they tried to comprehend what was happening. Then it hit them, the unmistakable sense that they were no longer in the present. It was as if the very air around them had stretched backward in time. They had crossed some invisible boundary, and the landscape they were standing in was no longer familiar. Her mother had told her all the stories, all the family members, and the lives of the people she loved. They had stood there. "Look at the lake," Anna whispered, pointing toward the water. The once calm and glassy surface was now rippling violently, as if disturbed by something deep below. But it wasn't just the water. Everything around them was wrong. The trees, now twisted and dead-looking, seemed to stretch into a horizon that didn't exist in their time. The lake's reflection didn't mirror the world they knew. It was showing them a past version of the land. The trees were sparse, the ground was barren, and the air felt thin, like they had stepped into a time long forgotten. "We've been transported," Rachel gasped, her voice cracking. "This isn't the present. This is before the lake was even discovered." David's face paled. "You mean like centuries ago?" Mark swallowed hard, his skepticism evaporating with every passing second. "This is impossible. We're stuck in the past." Anna felt a knot form in her stomach. They had been sucked into a different time, and from the looks of it, it wasn't a time they should be in. The whispers in the wind became louder, clearer. "Drown, drown," the voices repeated, and with each echo, the pressure in the air grew heavier, more suffocating. "I'm trained to drown and all. Anyway, I'm Airgirl. The group huddled together, fear tightening around them like a vice. The trees, now twisted and strange, seemed to close in on them. The lake, no longer the peaceful body of water they had first encountered, seemed to pulse with dark energy, its surface now black and foreboding. The distant sound of water lapping against the shore now seemed like a warning, a harbinger of doom. We have to find a way out of here," Anna whispered, her voice trembling, "before it takes us too." But the lake, ancient and malevolent, had other plans. The air around them felt thick, as if the past was trying to swallow them whole. The trees creaked and groaned, the wind howled, and the whispers grew louder, more desperate. And as the group turned to leave, they felt it again. The unmistakable pull of the water. Something in the lake wanted them, just as it had wanted Rachel. It was calling to them, a force beyond time and understanding, a presence that had been waiting for them to fall into its grasp. They had come seeking peace, but they had stumbled into something far darker. The lake, with its twisted reflection and ancient hunger, had claimed them, and now, it seemed, it was ready to collect its prize. With every step they took, they realized they were getting further from reality and closer to something far more dangerous. The whispers of the drowned, the distorted reflections in the water, and the unsettling atmosphere were all signs that the lake's curse was alive, and it had only just begun to claim its victims. The air was thick with tension as Rachel, Anna, and David stood at the edge of the lake, staring at the rippling water. The once serene surface had transformed into something darker, more sinister. The whispers had returned, louder this time, as though the very lake itself was breathing, calling them in. Their hearts pounded in their chests, and the coldness of fear clung to them, suffocating every breath they took. They had no choice but to confront the lake's terrible power. The realization of what had been happening all along was beginning to settle in. The strange time slips, the shifting reflections, the disturbing pull of the water, these were all part of something far older and far more malevolent than they had imagined. The lake was not just a body of water. It was a doorway, a portal between times and dimensions, created on the grounds of an ancient burial site. The spirits of those who had drowned, the souls of the long dead, had become trapped in this place, their restless energy manifesting in terrifying ways. As Rachel paced by the water's edge, she felt the icy grip of the lake tugging at her once again. It had been her, after all, who had been the first to experience its strange power. The creature, the entity beneath the surface, had been waiting for her, for all of them, and now they were caught in its web, slowly being pulled deeper into its grasp. He began quietly, walking carefully up toward the raft. "I can't believe it," Hannah said in a low voice. her gaze fixed on the dark water. The lake? It's not just a lake. It's some kind of curse, a trap. The bodies of the drowned souls are trapped in there. They're trying to pull us in, use us to escape. David shook his head in disbelief, as though trying to reject the truth that was settling in. But why us? Why now? And he sort of looked in the eyes of Victor, whom he felt could really trust now. Rachel's face hardened, her eyes scanning the water. Because we were meant to come here. The lake is a doorway, and we've stumbled right into it. It's been waiting for us. Eh? A chill ran through the group as they realized just how helpless they were against the lake's dark power. Every moment they spent near the water seemed to drag them further from the world they knew and into a distorted, cursed reality. The whispers had started to feel like a constant presence, filling their minds, pushing them toward the water. The reflections in the lake were no longer clear, no longer revealing their true selves. Instead, they showed twisted versions of who they were, distorted, grotesque images that flickered in and out of focus. But the lake wasn't just trying to pull them in, it was manipulating them. The souls of the drowned were using their reflections to confuse and disorient them, to make them second-guess what they saw, what they heard, and what they felt. The water was alive with the energy of the trapped spirits who were desperately trying to break free. Rachel's eyes were wide with fear and determination. She felt a deep connection to the lake, as if its call had been meant for her, as if she were somehow part of its terrible secret. The entity beneath the surface was no mere spirit. It was something more ancient, a creature born of the souls of the drowned, a malevolent force that fed on the life force of the living, and it was now awake, ready to claim them as its next victims. "We need to get out of here," David said urgently. "We need to find a way back to our time. We can't stay here any longer." Jake packed his bags, but Rachel wasn't listening. She was staring at the water, her expression unreadable. The fear in her eyes had shifted into something else, something like resolve. She could feel the pull of the water, its power drawing her closer. But there was also something else inside her, something deep that whispered to her, telling her what she needed to do. "Oh, right, somewhere Argentina." "I can't leave," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not yet. I need to face this. I need to go back into the lake." Anna looked at her in horror. "What are you talking about? You can't—" But Rachel was already stepping forward, her feet sinking into the damp earth. "I have to stop it. I can feel it. The lake? This place? It's not just the water. It's the thing underneath it. It's feeding on us. If I can go to where it started, where the lake was still pure, maybe I can stop it." I don't know where it's at, or who it's for. Why are the glasses gone? The vest is empty. I don't understand." David stepped forward, his hand outstretched, but Rachel was already moving toward the water, her mind made up. She had seen the truth. The entity that had been awakened beneath the lake was not just a creature of the past. It was the very essence of death itself, formed from the souls of those who had drowned and been forgotten. It had no mercy, no compassion. It only hungered. David still spun, and the lake started to wane, his body turning red and paler, his heart hanging tumbling in his chest. "Rachel, no!" Anna cried out, but it was too late. Without another word, Rachel dove into the lake. The coldness of the water hit her like a shock, but she didn't hesitate. She swam deeper, past the place where the reflections of her friends had become distorted and warped. Her vision blurred as she sank further, the water growing darker, colder. Her lungs screamed for air, but she pushed herself onward, determined to reach the heart of the curse. And then, as if the water itself parted for her, she was pulled into another time, a time when the lake had been untouched, still, and pure. The forest was different, the trees taller and healthier, their roots not tangled with the weight of centuries of death. The air was clean, the sky clear. It was as if she had been transported to an alternate version of reality, a version before the curse had taken hold. But even here, Rachel could feel the presence of the entity lurking just beneath the surface. She could hear its voice, low, guttural, a whisper that seemed to crawl into her very mind. It spoke in a language she didn't understand, but its meaning was clear. She was not meant to be here. Rachel swam deeper, seeking the source of the curse, determined to confront it head-on. The entity was powerful, but Rachel had a strength inside her that she hadn't known existed. She had to find a way to stop it, to sever the connection between the lake and the souls trapped there. She didn't know if it was possible, but she had to try. But the deeper she went, the more the entity fought back. The lake's water grew colder, the pressure around her chest tightening. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, flickering and distorting, as the entity revealed itself in its true form. An enormous, amorphous mass of writhing souls, each one reaching out, trying to pull her in. Rachel's heart raced, her every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when she had come so far. As she reached out to the very heart of the lake, she could feel the cold tendrils of the creature wrapping around her. She reached into the depths, her hand brushing against the source of the curse. And in that moment, she realized the horrifying truth. The entity, the lake, the curse, it was all one. The lake was not just a reflection of death. It was death, a doorway between life and the beyond, a place where the dead and the living could never truly be separate. And as Rachel's fingers brushed the heart of the lake, she knew she had made a choice. She had come to stop the entity, but in doing so, she had condemned herself to be part of the lake forever, to become one of the souls it had claimed. With a final, desperate cry, she let the darkness swallow her whole. The group stumbled away from the lake, exhausted and drained, their bodies covered in dirt and water, their minds heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. The sun was setting, casting a long shadow over the surrounding trees, but it felt like the day would never end. They had escaped the lake, at least that's what they told themselves. But deep inside, each of them felt the undeniable pull of something more sinister, something that lingered in the air like a dark omen. Rachel was gone, swallowed by the lake. Her decision to confront the entity, her final act of bravery, or perhaps her tragic mistake. The others had seen her disappear into the blackness of the water, heard her scream fade into the distance, and watched as the lake closed in around her. They had tried to reach her, but it was too late. The water had taken her, just as it had taken so many others before. Anna, David, and Mark walked in a daze, their thoughts muddled by the horrors they had faced. The world felt different now, like the ground beneath their feet wasn't quite as solid, and the sky above them wasn't as wide or welcoming. They were no longer the same people who had arrived at the lake. They had been changed, altered by the dark force that lurked beneath the surface of the water. Anna, David, and Mark walked into the lake. They had been changed, altered by the dark force that lurked beneath the surface of the water, covered in blood. As they reached the edge of the forest, the whispers returned. This time they didn't come from the lake. They seemed to come from all around them, a subtle murmur in the air, like a memory that refused to be forgotten. The breeze had a strange, unnatural quality to it, carrying with it the faint scent of water, cold, stagnant, and dangerous. David, who had always been the skeptic, was the first to notice something was wrong. He had been walking with his head down, trying to focus on the path ahead when something caught his eye. He looked up, his heart skipping a beat. The lake. It was still there, far in the distance, a vast black mirror beneath the fading light. But something about it had changed. It was no longer just a body of water. It was a presence, a thing that watched them, waited for them. Its surface, once smooth and calm, was now rippling gently, as if it were alive, breathing in the darkness. Is it following us? Mark's voice was barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the lake. Anna and David turned to look. At first, they didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but as they continued to stare, their reflections began to shift. The trees around them were distorted, their outlines blurred and flickering like shadows in a nightmare. The faces staring back at them in the water were not quite their own. Something was wrong. Something was off. Uh-huh. Very funny how you see things. David felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine as he stepped closer to the water's edge. His reflection was clear, but the eyes staring back at him were hollow, empty. It was as if someone, or something else, was looking through him. No, Anna muttered, shaking her head, this can't be real. But it was. The longer they looked at their reflections, the more they realized that the world around them had changed. The landscape was the same, but the subtle distortions were everywhere. The trees seemed twisted, their limbs reaching out like fingers, as though they were alive. The sky had lost its warmth, and the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the weight of the lake's power had followed them, seeped into the very fabric of the world they had returned to. Mark's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the water, his fingers barely brushing the surface. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The reflection of the trees, the sky, and his own face all mirrored reality. But then, a ripple spread across the water, and for a split second, Mark saw something else in the reflection. A version of himself that wasn't quite right. His face was pale and distorted, his expression twisted in fear. He pulled his hand back quickly, his heart racing. What the hell is happening? The group exchanged nervous glances. They all felt it. The lake's presence was still there, lingering just beyond their reach. It was as if the water itself had imprinted on their souls, leaving an indelible mark that could never be erased. Even though they had left the lake behind, they couldn't escape its power. It followed them, wrapped around them like an invisible thread, tugging at their minds and their hearts. So, I don't understand, Anna whispered. We're back, but this isn't right. The lake, it's here, with us. David felt the weight of her words settle into his chest, the truth sinking in like a stone. We never left, he said softly. The lake, it's still a part of us, a part of everything now. They turned away from the water, hoping that walking further would somehow make the strange feeling go away. But with each step, the world around them felt more foreign, more unreal. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, no matter how far they walked. The trees seemed to close in on them, and the light from the setting sun only deepened the shadows, making the landscape appear more distorted. Suddenly, Mark stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide with panic. Look at the sky, he said, pointing up toward the heavens. He turned and looked. His legs were shaking. He hadn't drunk his coffee. They all looked up. The sky was changing, the color of the clouds shifting in a way that made no sense. The moon, which had been full when they first arrived, was now a dark blood-red crescent, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The stars blinked in and out of view, as though they were struggling to stay in place. The air felt thicker, colder, as though the very fabric of reality was tearing apart at the seams. Alex put an arm around Clara as well. Clara looked at him with a restless expression, appropriate for the truth of the matter. We're not in the world we left, Anna said, her voice trembling. Something is wrong. This is all wrong. I'm sorry, she murmured, her voice slightly shaky. I've kept you here. David felt a surge of dread as he realized that they weren't just haunted by the memory of the lake. They were still part of it. The entity had followed them, and the curse that had gripped the lake had somehow extended to the world they had returned to. It was as though the lake had pulled them into its reality, a twisted reflection of the world that would never let them go. Hiding by the window of the warehouse, it was one of the first times Reardon had seen him for the longest time. The light from the diorama lit his face upon it. He caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a figure standing by the edge of the lake, just outside their line of sight. It was Rachel, or at least it looked like Rachel, but something in the way she stood, motionless and silent, made their blood run cold. Her reflection in the water was clearer than it had ever been before. "So I welcomed," she said. And in that reflection, they saw what they feared the most: the lake, the entity, the spirits. It wasn't just the past they had escaped, it was the present, the future. And it was waiting for them, always waiting, as the black water of the lake reached out to claim them once again. The curse of the lake would never let them go. Years passed since the fateful day by the lake, but the memories lingered like a dark cloud over the lives of the group who had dared to uncover its secrets. Time, they had hoped, would dull the pain, the fear, and the inexplicable terror that had followed them back from that accursed place. But time had proven to be as unreliable as the reflections in the lake's surface, and the curse, if it could even be called a curse, was far from over. Rachel's disappearance had shattered the group. Her decision to dive into the lake to confront the entity was the last they had seen of her. Despite all efforts to find her, there were no signs, no answers. It was as if the lake had swallowed her whole, erasing all traces of her existence. The others had returned home, each of them haunted by the experience, but they carried their own burdens in silence, too afraid to speak of the horrors they'd encountered. Anna moved far away, attempting to start over in a new city. She found work, made new friends, and tried to bury the past beneath the weight of her responsibilities. But no matter where she went, no matter how many faces she passed on the street, she could never shake the sensation that someone was always watching her. The feeling was subtle at first, just a creeping sense that she was never truly alone. "Anna," and start sunny. Start sunny. "Anna, I hope you're having a good day, my friend." But soon it grew into something more oppressive. She couldn't sleep without seeing the lake's reflection in her dreams, or the monstrous entity lurking beneath the surface, its hollow eyes staring back at her. Anna's social life began to deteriorate. She withdrew from her friends and kept to herself, unsure of how to explain the deep fear she felt. Sometimes, when she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she felt a disconnect, as though the person looking back at her was someone else entirely, someone who had been lost to the lake and was forever altered by it. David tried to continue with his life as though nothing had happened, throwing himself into his work and relationships. But the cracks in his facade began to show. He would find himself staring at reflections in windows, in puddles, in any water that happened to be nearby, expecting to see something or someone that wasn't supposed to be there. His thoughts would often drift back to that moment when Rachel had disappeared beneath the surface, when her reflection had become something twisted and unrecognizable. He couldn't rid himself of the image, no matter how hard he tried. And as much as he wanted to convince himself it was all in his head, he couldn't ignore the odd occurrences that followed him wherever he went. The flickering of lights in his apartment, the strange cold spots that would appear for no reason, and the inexplicable sensation of being pulled toward bodies of water. Mark was the only one who had attempted to deny the supernatural elements of their experience. He had convinced himself that there had to be a logical explanation, something rational that could explain the strange occurrences. But the longer he tried to live in denial, the more unhinged he became. He started experiencing vivid nightmares, ones where he was drowning in the very lake that had enclaimed Rachel. In these dreams, he could never escape, and every time he thought he had reached the surface for air, the black water would pull him down again, further into its depths. This felt like the end of the world as he knew that world to be. Standing near it was like ending the restless days with the other dream children. The boy started to panic and screamed. The physical toll on Mark was just as alarming as the mental. His once pristine appearance began to wither. He lost weight, became pale, and developed a nervous tic whenever he was near water. He couldn't understand it, but he felt an overwhelming need to leave. Leave the city, leave his old life behind. Something inside him told him that as long as he remained in the place where the memories were most fresh, the curse would never release its grip on him. So he moved, trying to outrun it, but it was always there, haunting him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Months after they had gone their separate ways, the group occasionally exchanged hesitant messages, but the distance between them grew with each passing year. There were no reunions, no attempts to relive the past or reconcile what had happened. They had all learned to live with the quiet dread that followed them. But the lake was never truly behind them. The whispers, the calls, and the pull of the water never ceased. Every so often, Anna would drive past a lake, any lake, and feel that strange compulsion to stop, to look, and to listen. She never did. She never allowed herself the chance to gaze into the still surface and see what might stare back at her. But she knew it was there. She always knew. David began to suspect that Rachel's disappearance was only the beginning. When he visited the town near the lake, he learned that other strange disappearances had occurred over the years, many of them never solved. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the cursed lake, about the strange phenomenon that surrounded it, and about the unsettling fact that the water never seemed to age. The same eerie reflection, the same dark pull. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that the lake's power didn't just affect those who swam in it, it affected the entire town, the entire area, like a poison seeping into the earth itself. Mark's last attempt at freedom came in the form of therapy. He sought out help, desperate to rid himself of the terror that had taken root in his mind. But it was clear that even the most professional counseling couldn't erase what had happened. The memories were too vivid, too alive in his mind. It was as if the lake had branded them all, and no amount of time or distance could ever undo its influence. Despite their efforts to move on, the curse of the lake remained. As if trapped in a warped cycle, each of them found themselves returning to thoughts of the water, the creatures that lurked beneath, and the twisted reflections that had become their nightmares. Finally, in 10 years, they got around to putting their nightmares behind them, and they never left the lake. The legacy of that cursed lake persisted, and its call would forever haunt those who had dared to confront its terrible power. For the lake had no true end. It waited patiently, watching for the next group of unwitting visitors, knowing that one day they would answer its call. And when they did, it would pull them into its depths, where time and reality twisted, leaving them forever lost, caught in the lake's never-ending reflection. Friends, this story is entirely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. The locations, characters, and events depicted are not real. Any resemblance to actual places, persons, or events is purely coincidental. The intent of this story is not to offend anyone's sentiments or promote superstition. Please regard it as a work of fiction. If you enjoyed this story and want more thrilling tales, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more spine-chilling content.